Tonight, as always, I have my co-host, Peter Ray Allison.
Good evening, everyone.
And back again, and hopefully with less technical difficulties, Anna Smith-Spark.
Hi.
Yeah, so a lot of people probably wouldn't have seen, unless you were watching the last sort of travesty that was the podcast with Anna. We had a lot of technical difficulties, so she's back again, and hopefully, no, 100%, it's going to be.
Thank you, Matt.
Famous last words. It's going to be fine. There's not going to be any technical issues this time round. So, Anna, for everybody who doesn't know who you are you? What is your thing? What do you do?
Oh, what am I doing? Being amazed that this is all working at the moment. Astonished. I haven't sat and watched Matt frantically plug things in and unplug things and swear. My name's Anna Smith-Spark. I write grimdark epic fantasy. I'm the author of the Empires of Dust trilogy, The Court of Broken Knives, The Tower of Living Dying, and the House of Sacrifice. And my new book came out just at the beginning of the month, which is A Woman of the Sword. That's a special edition cover, and then I have that's the normal cover.
Ooh.
Which is sort of very personal. It's grimdark fantasy, but from one very kind of normal woman's perspective. So it's taking the kind of huge clash of empires, titanic, vast battles and dragons and sort of cataclysmic people living out their destiny that was going on in Empires of Dust, and looking at that sort of events like that from the point of view of myself, essentially, just a person caught up in it.
So is it based on you as a person, as in the characters based on you, or is it just you as an average Joe?
The character is based on me.
Yes. Okay. And how was that? How was that writing yourself?
Cathartic. It was written during lockdown, so it was. Yeah, it is about balancing kind of caring responsibilities and caring for children, and trying to find your own fulfillment in life, and then trying and failing to manage all of that with a catastrophe unfolding around you. So trying to keep people safe, trying to keep yourself some kind of fulfillment, and trying to just deal with the world slowly collapsing around you in a way you have no control over.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, how did you balance all that? Like you mentioned your family life and everything. How did you manage like all that and writing at the same time?
Badly.
Fair.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was written kind of, I say it was written in lockdown. It was actually written kind of in the bits of lockdown that weren't as bad. Because during the bits of actual lockdown, I didn't get any writing done, because it was just that kind of, I was one of those people that had to just stop everything, drop everything creative, because I had children to look after.
Yeah.
And so that was just kind of homeschooling and things. And so that had to be everything. That had to be the centre of everything. And everything else just had to kind of stop or squeeze in around that. And then, so that some of that kind of experience is in the book, that kind of experience of just having to stop and give up things for yourself, give up the things that are you. And that kind of, because it was hugely important. It was the most important thing you can possibly do in that kind of situation is try and protect people more vulnerable than you from the worst consequences of it. But it did mean having to give up a huge amount of myself. And then, it was bizarre. When lockdown happened, I think The House of Sacrifice was published in paperback, I think actually around the same day as lockdown. It was one of those kind of, so what should have been. I mean, I was really lucky because it had been published in hardback and in America before that. So it was only the UK paperback release that was affected. But what should have been, the kind of final, it's all done. Here's the paperback out. Everything is done. I've done this, I've scaled Everest. I've achieved the amazing dream of having written a fantasy trilogy. And instead it was like, oh yeah, no, I was promoting it. I promoted it. I did the one promotional thing for the paperback of House of Sacrifice at Super Relaxed Fantasy Club. And it was the week before lockdown, and we all kind of, it was really bizarre because you'd be I was on the tube going there, and there'd be people on the tube sort of putting on hand sanitizer like every 5 minutes on the tube. And you'd be like, why are you doing that? You're just sitting there on the tube and you put on more hand sanitizer. You know, the only thing you've touched since you last put on hand sanitizer is that bottle of hand sanitizer. And then we were all in a totally airless, dank basement. And it was this whole bizarre thing of everyone was like, kind of, are you hugging? I don't know. Are you hugging? Oh, let's hug. But we'll air kiss and then it'll be safe. And then, like, 4 days later or something, we were in lockdown, and you look back and you think, that was insane.
It was like, I don't even sort of, I don't know if it's like, it's not like I blocked it out, but it's just sort of, it just seems so long ago. And it does seem so unreal that for like effectively 2 years we were, was it 2 years? Was it, we started?
3 years.
Yeah, 2
2
years.
years on and off.
Yeah.
It was, years on and off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I got a thing up the other day on my phone, actually. Facebook kindly gave me a memory. So this day, last year, this day 2 years ago, last week, I put out a big thing on Facebook saying, the bookshops have reopened. Oh, glorious day. That's it, thinking, my God, that's just like, it's really bizarre because it does feel like another world now. It feels like, at the time, it just felt like, and actually I remember all that stuff at the time about, oh, this is the way it's going to be forever now. And there was all this really bizarre stuff, like, oh, no one's going to go out anymore, and like just really, really random stuff like, this is clearly the end of makeup and beauty counters, and this is the end of people going shopping and changing rooms in shops, and this is the end of people doing anything socially. And I guess actually, Peter, if you and I sort of do stuff on cybersecurity and stuff, the way people talk about the world is changed. We will never ever go back to doing anything face to face anymore. And at the time, it kind of seemed like, maybe we won't. Maybe this is it. Maybe my children will grow up and I have to explain one day there was this thing called a cinema, a theatre, and a public swimming pool. And they'll be like, nah. And now you're like, what the hell? That just seems like another life. That was like, that was a nightmare. That doesn't seem real in the slightest.
Yeah, it didn't.
It very much a once in a lifetime event, an experience that like no other. And fingers crossed, it will be like nothing again.
Yes.
Well, we're with it forever now, aren't we? It's not something that's just going to go away. It's just a thing we've dealt with.
We dealt with it basically. We have like we have vaccinations and annual top ups, which it won't stop us catching it, but it will, give us our body the defenses it needs to protect ourselves from the worst of it. And just lessen the impact it has upon our body, which just basically makes you feel a bit rough for a few days, pretty rough, but it's not going to kill you, thankfully. But I mean, I remember lockdown, and the thing I remember most is Joe Wicks. Doing Joe Wicks with the kids every morning was torture.
What's Joe Wicks?
You didn't do Joe Wicks, Matt?
What's Joe Wicks?
That exercise guy, every morning, 9 o'clock, he'd have us jumping up and down in our living room on YouTube.
Oh, no. No.
There you go.
See, I'm one of those people who, because I didn't lockdown. It did get a bit sort of kind of boring that we couldn't go out, and I love going to the cinema. Like, I really enjoy going to the cinema, so that really got to me. And like, I don't go out drinking as much in my older age. I don't go out drinking as much and stuff, so it didn't really affect me too much because I've got a lot of nerdy stuff I do in the house and things like that. But I kind of liked it in certain ways because a lot of people who I didn't talk to regularly, we started talking a lot more. We started there's a lot more group chats and things going on. A lot of people trying to do stuff because everybody was in the same place and couldn't go out and didn't have the excuse of, oh man, we can't play those games or we can't do that. And I was like, I've got no excuses now. So I was kind of enjoying it, kind of in a way, because a lot of people were playing games with me.
But I mean, like, what I found was especially is I really missed meeting people in person.
Yeah.
And like going to conventions and like going to places like Edge. I mean, I was gutted when Edge was cancelled because I was looking forward to seeing all the writers and authors there. But then, nope. Yeah. But yeah, well, I mean, we say like the Woman of the Sword was kind of based on your experiences. How did you kind of translate like a global pandemic into your fantasy world? And
been thinking about this sort of, not the pandemic obviously, but I've been sort of thinking about these kind of stories before anyway. So when I was writing The House of Sacrifice, obviously, I mean, I was hugely sort of invested in Mareth's story and Thalia's story and Tobias and Orhan. But if you notice, there's sort of stuff I weave in more and more in that about just kind of little bits about the daily life of the people in Mareth's army, particularly. So because I was really got more and more interested in thinking about these people who are just kind of there because it's their life. It's just, they're soldiers. They've been fighting for years now. By the time the House of Sacrifice ends, I think that they have been fighting for 3 or 4 years, I think. So, and they've got, this is a massive army. It's got a massive load of camp followers. And the camp followers have got camp followers. I mean, if you look at sort of big accounts of, really big, like Alexander's army, which is obviously, so Mareth, obviously Mareth is based on Alexander, the campaigns of Alexander. So you have this kind of basically this huge court just traveling around through Asia. Alexander, he leaves Macedonia, and until after that, he basically doesn't have a home. He's living continually on campaign. Everything is going on in campaign, or temporarily they stop in a city or a palace, and he'll set up there for a while. But everything is just happened. You have this whole society operating around the army. So the army's marching. The soldiers, a lot of them would have picked up women, children. The women would have had children. You have children growing up in the army camp who, that's their life. That's the only thing they've ever done. You have people who are, you have people there to work to provide goods and equipment and services to people who are providing goods and equipment and services to the women who are attached to the soldiers. You've got that kind of level of an entire sort of basically a city on the move following with the army. So you've got people whose lives are invested in this. And I mean, another thing that I'm really a story that absolutely obsesses me and that I draw on really heavily for Woman of the Sword and for stuff at the end of The House of Sacrifice is Mother Courage. I saw Mother Courage, Brett's Mother Courage. I saw Fiona Shaw as Mother Courage, which is astonishing. And again, that's originally based on a book called Simplicissimus, which is a series book, a sort of picaresque book about people in the 30 Years' War. And again, it literally was the 30 Years' War. It's not kind of continual, it's not sort of World War II style carnage for 30 years, but it is a war that goes on continually in Germany for 30 years. It totally dominates the life experience and the entire socio-economic situation of Central Europe for 30 years. And Mother Courage is someone whose life is, she makes her money traveling around selling stuff to soldiers. She's with the army. Her entire economic and personal identity is totally bound up with being attached to this, being invested in with war, basically. And it consumes her in the end. But that notion of people who are just sort of, this is their life, this is their job. And again, it's that thing that began to really obsess me writing, the more I was writing Empires of Dust, about the people who did this stuff. So this kind of, the soldiers who are committing these atrocities. And I mean, all the stuff most of the atrocities that are carried out in Empires of Dust were based on exaggerated versions of real historical things. I mean, you look at the Mongol sort of conquest of the entire of Eurasia, and they are obliterating entire cities. Tamerlane did genuinely, historically, as far as we can tell, make piles of human heads outside his cities after he'd taken them, and people are just doing this. I mean, there's that really, really interesting little tiny bit that's never explored in The Force Awakens, when you get that little bit at the beginning with Finn, before he's Finn, when he's just one of the stormtroopers, and there's that little bit where he's just, this is just what he does. This is his life. His friends. This is just what he does, and that kind of exploring that is something that really interests me, and is something I got really into thinking about. So I was thinking anyway about the kind of daily lives of people in this sort of huge, epic, total war situations. You often read about, there's more and more history which is looking at the lived experience of people who were just very, very ordinary people going back. I mean, obviously, the 30 Years' War, you can begin to get letters and diaries and accounts written by people who were just very, very normal people, not commanders, not aristocrats, not people who were kind of knew what was going on, but people who are just sort of caught up in this. And then obviously later wars, you get more and more stuff. And that kind of historical, trying to look at just people's experiences. There's a amazing book I've got called 1864, which is looking at letters and diary accounts of the Second Danish-Prussian War, which was an absolute disaster. Denmark basically decided that they could totally take Prussia, which
what a mistake of a maker. Yeah.
And they could clearly totally take Prussia, because if the Prussians tried to invade them, they had the Danewerk, which was basically like their equivalent of Offa's Dyke.
Okay.
Yeah, they had basically a prehistoric sort of ditch and trench fortification that clearly would stop the Prussians. So
okay.
They deliberately antagonized the Prussians, and the Prussian war machine is like, it's a ditch.
Yes, the great military strategy of we'll dig a really deep hole.
Yes, and the Prussians just go in with their howitzers, and it's this kind. It's this kind of, but it's actually one of the first. It's actually possibly more than the first one. It's basically the first example of massive heavy artillery kind of modern warfare, and there are a lot of. It's one of the first wars you have a lot of accounts of both sides from just the foot soldiers. So there's amazing account. There's a wonderful book I've got which is just accounts of letters and diaries from both sides, and you get these there's all sort of recurring stuff they're writing about this very, very strange stuff about how after a huge Prussian bombardment had finished, a lark started singing, and that recurs in multiple diary and letters. So it's that kind of lived experience of war, and that was something I've been thinking about anyway. So I've been thinking about writing an account, something that was much more like that. It's amazing writing about kings and, people of great power, Marath and Thalia and Orhan, who've all got power and knowledge and can move events around and are responsible for the lives and deaths of thousands. But it's really fascinating just looking at the people who are just caught up in it, the people, what our lives would be like if this just happened.
Yeah. Did that shift
anyway?
Yeah. Did that shift in perspective? Because you couldn't go in from like the kings and heroes to the foot soldiers and the people caught up in it. Did that shift in perspective, influence how you approach the writing?
Probably, yes. I mean, it is incredibly raw, because it was then, this was something, it was all in my head, and I was thinking about it. And also, I mean, so Empires of Dust is based around, it's kind of modelled on the Iliad and the Anabasis of Alexander, and obviously Alexander himself consciously modelled himself on Achilles. So it is that kind of huge, heroic, that sort of, the story of sort of this great Titanic hero figure. And then I was also started thinking also about Greek tragedy, the much more domestic, so things like the Antigone, the stories which are about the women caught up in this, the stories about the kind of personal. So Antigone is a woman who basically has to choose between burying her brother and live and getting, she has to choose between her fiance and burying her brother, and sort of therefore, you know, doing her responsibility to her brother who's dead, but she has to bury him, or to her fiance and his family. So it's about those kind of very personal choices we have to make, about that we all have, about, you know, being torn by the different responsibilities we might have and the different people in our lives and the kind of different importances we place on. And particularly, I mean, obviously, as soon as you start getting into people who are in relationships and in-laws and that sort of stuff, the whole horrible mess of that kind of, those kind of relationships. So and those kind of very personal. So the Antigone is after a war. Her brother is a traitor to the city that she's about to marry into the royal family of. It's all kind of, you know, again, it's that kind of horrible conflation of massive, epic events, war and sieges, and the absolute personal. So I was thinking about all of that stuff anyway, and then COVID happened, and just the kind of, when I then had the space to write, the rawness of one thinking in those much more personal terms. I mean, Marith and Thalia are very personal to me, but their experiences are so far, you know, so it's a sort of dream fantasy, whereas this was that kind of raw. A lot of it's about women and children and just how you deal with those kind of, the rawness of trying to deal with all of that, the rawness of having given up, completely having to give up my writing at that point. And as we said, when people were talking about like, oh, this might be forever, that kind of sense of like, I'm just, you know, when people are talking about, well, maybe schools can just be online permanently now, and there's me thinking like, well, that's it for me, isn't it? That's just, you know, that's just it. And just that incredibly raw, painful sense of being locked in a house, not trying to, you know, suddenly having to homeschool children, and you know, there's lots of, I remember trying to teach 2 different primary school maths lessons at the same time one time, and just this sense of like trying to teach them trying to teach long division, and I have never got long division myself, and just staring at this video and this teacher saying like, this video with this person just trying to explain it, and me just, I don't understand a word of this, and I'm trying to explain it to my daughter. And, you know, eventually she's going to have to do a GCSE in this stuff. Not now, but, you know, eventually she's going to have to do a GCSE in this stuff. And I appear to be entirely responsible at this point.
Oh, God.
For that.
At least you'll get a very good history. At least you would have got a very good history.
Yeah, well, yes, only, but if it's only yes. So, yeah, certain things, but yeah, just, and obviously, and then, yeah, I mean, she would have been, you know, and then she was like, yeah, Mum, you're not my teacher, just sod off. And, you know,
Yeah.
And the pressure of all of that kind of pressure cooker of like, just kind of, you know, I'm completely failing at this. And there's no, you know, I'm completely failing at this. And all I can do is, you know, I just want to cry right now. And that's not really very helpful for my daughter's entire future now on the line. And I've just given up everything. And obviously it is really, really important I give up everything, because if I, you know, the temptation of saying just, well, look, you know, you guys just go and play Minecraft for 9 hours and I'll do some writing is huge, but I cannot do that because I will really regret it.
Yeah.
And, you know, it will be my fault in years to come when you have done nothing but play Minecraft for 6 months. So clearly I have, you know, I've got to put in all this work, but I can't do it. And Jesus. And yeah, I mean, actually, and also I could, through the whole, until my parents got vaccinated, every moment of my day I was going around and overlaying just what I could see was an image of me standing outside hospital with my mum in intensive care, and I could just see that. I could see, and it would be my fault somehow. You know, I'd have gone round and broken the rules and gone into her house to see her for 10 minutes, and I'd given her COVID and she'd die. And I could see that like a sort of, like one of those kind of, you know, special magic glass, special IT glasses, all the time for about probably the first year until they got the vaccines rolled out. Yeah. So yeah, trying to live like that continually. And again, not being like, you know, if the children are like, why can't we see grandma? And trying to be like, no, because if we see Grandma, she'll die, and it will all be my fault.
Oh God! Wow.
So yes, all of that was just, the pressure cooker of all of that, just the kind of rawness of. So Woman of the Sword is an incredibly raw book, and actually a lot of it is about kind of helplessness and hopelessness and fear, but actually, so I mean, there's all there's sort of weird stuff where people are marching. At one point, we've got soldiers marching around, and they literally don't know where they're going or why. Which was, I'm kind of assuming I've had some amazing reviews so far, but I'm assuming I'll get some reviews saying like, just what, they're just, there's no plot. They're just kind of, they just march. At one point they marched for days and days in one direction. And then one morning they're just told actually they're marching in a totally different direction. And they're basically just packing up and going back the way they came. And they never know why any of that happens. There's little tiny hints in the background that they kind of overhear people having little whispered conversations. But that sense of absolute helplessness that, they're soldiers, they can't say no. Or they can't say, we're not doing this until someone's explained it.
It's not the reason why, it's but to do and die.
Yes, yeah. And that feeling of just absolute, this is totally beyond your control. Whatever is going to happen tomorrow. I mean, again, it obsesses me. Kind of things like the 30 Years' War or the wars of the Alexander's successors and things, the way people just change sides all the time. And you just wonder what on earth the foot soldiers in that. You just kind of.
I was thinking about this the other day actually, and I forgot how much you were into your history, and I'm just listening to all of this and going, oh my God, I could talk about this forever. Talking about the Schleswig Holstein wars and stuff, and I was like, well, yes. I think the Danes they obviously kind of thought, well, we won the first war, maybe we could do it a second time, and then obviously Prussia at that time went, yeah, well, we kind of got our shit together, and we proceeded to beat everybody in pretty short succession, because it's like the Danes, then the Austrians, then the French, pretty quickly.
Yeah, everybody,
pretty much. I was thinking
but this thing about just not, imagine just working, like, you work for Tesco's and then someone turns up and says like, you spent like the last 5 years trying to make everyone shop at Tesco's. Well, now as from tomorrow, actually we're making everyone shop at, your job is to make everyone not work at Tesco's. You're like, what?
Yeah, I was thinking
that kind of shifts.
Yeah, I was thinking about that all the time. Not all the time. I was thinking about that the other day. I can't even remember what I was watching, but it was just. Oh yes, that was it. I was watching a documentary about Edward Bruce, his invasion of Ireland, and it's an invasion they don't really talk about because they kind of didn't do anything. They kind of came in, they kind of beat a few English armies, and then caused a lot of famine and stuff like that, and then had to leave, and it sort of kind of shadowed over because obviously Robert the Bruce, big sort of kind of Scottish hero and stuff like that, and it was just sort of like, a lot of people in Ireland, would take their side and then would switch sides and then would just sort of kind of, they would be told that, by the way, this guy's your high king now. It's like, yeah, but this other guy it was like 5 minutes ago. And I was just saying, like, it was a horrible time to be alive, because you were literally just fucked all ways. It didn't matter what side you were on. You were literally, if you were a peasant or you were a soldier, it was just a grim time to live. You were just gonna. I was thinking about it, I was like, I'm so glad I didn't live in that time, because it would literally have been, you do as you're told or you die. And even if you're told, you'll probably die, but that's just the way it is, and yes, you have to accept it. And I was like, that's grim. That's so grim. That's like, I'm so lucky.
The really interesting thing is the way people, there's kind of bizarre. It is just chaos. It's like, I mean, you try and read accounts of why the 30 Years' War was being thought, and people are like, you read all these academic accounts, and they just come down to, we haven't got a clue. No one has got a clue why it just carried on. And then you read this, this bizarre stuff where, sort of someone, they lose 50% of their troops to a plague outbreak, and then they lose 25% of the survivors to famine, and then they lose a battle, and they're left with like 5 troops. They're sort of them and their 6 mates legging it through a bog in the pouring rain. And then you're like, 6 months later, and they've raised another army. You're like,
Yeah, well, it's
what?
like you think about the Roman civil wars and the amount of, or not just Rome in general, and you think about the amount of armies they went through, especially like against Hannibal or against and they were perpetually just like, and then they went here and they raised a new army, and I was just like, how does that happen? Like, they just literally just turn up and go, by the way, this is a new legion over here, we just built these guys, and it's like, where did all these people come from, especially back in the day when population densities weren't as much and stuff, and it's mad. And you were talking about Temujin, Genghis Khan and stuff. He had a massive effect on the population of the earth. I can't remember the exact stat on it. I think he like killed 60 million people, and at that time it was like 11% of the Earth's population he killed.
Yeah, I've seen loads of stuff. People trying to work out how many, what the total casualties were, and it is insane. And actually, I mean, people have that image of Central Asia as just barren and desert, which is actually, I mean, so Lost in Empires of Dust, it is this kind of absurd city in an impenetrable desert. And I remember someone saying to me, like, it doesn't really seem to have a water supply. It's like, well, no, that's not the point, is it? It's like, it's that fantasy, it's that Orientalist fantasy that in Europe we have of these absurd Silk Road cities that are, richer and huger and more beautiful and more decadent than anything that people in Europe could possibly have imagined at that time. And apparently they're just stuck out in the desert, because now the sense we have now is, you see those sort of pictures of a lot of Central Asia, and it is just barren desert. Actually had the most amazing irrigation systems. And then they got destroyed, and that's why it's all desert now. It wasn't desert. It had incredible, huge irrigation systems and huge engineering knowledge of how, and hydraulic knowledge, and that was all destroyed.
Well, so it's like if you think of Egypt, if you were to ask anybody sort of like what if they thought of Egypt, you think pyramids and you think desert. You don't really think much else, maybe the Nile, but you read all the historical things, and obviously the Egypt was the breadbasket of Rome, and so sort of like you thinking, well, the breadbasket, well, it's all desert. Why would it be all desert? But it wasn't, because of the irrigation system, the advanced irrigation systems they had. So all of the sort of kind of main grain and stuff came from Egypt, and people don't think about that. It's like it's desert. Well, it wasn't always like that. It wasn't always like that.
Yeah, I mean, when you kind of first building like the world of A Woman with a Sword, where did you start? I mean, did you plan it all out in advance, or was it just sort of a stream of consciousness?
It was a stream of consciousness. So it's the same world. It's the same world as Empires of Dust. I mean, you can read it as a coda to Empires of Dust. You can see there are characters who are in the background who are the same character, who are the same. It's not got any of the big characters in Empires of Dust in it. They're done. So you can read it as a coda. You don't need to have at all. I keep stressing this to people because I'm terrified people are like, oh, clearly I can't read it, because you don't need to have any knowledge. There are little references and in-jokes, which if you read Empires of Dust, you will get. And part of it actually also was slightly reframing that world. So again, the way that so quickly stories change, or those kind of, I mean, you sort of those sort of before you've got things written down and before you've got official forms of communication, the kind of way that everything's rumour. So you get kind of, that's fascinating stuff in kind of, even about stuff like the Wars of the Roses, where no one seems to be quite sure, like, what's going on.
That's
and you
a
get
complicated
all
war. That's a complicated war.
But you get all these different accounts of, what's happened, and all that kind of uncertainty over whether someone's actually dead or alive, and that sort of. So there's sort of little bits in that where you can read into kind of, this is a totally misremembered bit of stuff that's actually happened in Empires of Dust, but this is another lot of people totally misremembering that and retelling it in a totally different way, and they've got the name slightly wrong also. But you don't need to know any of that stuff. But no, it just came pouring out as a kind of just me writing out a lot of my feelings about, a lot of my frustration and pain and fear at the time. I guess there's there's passages where I'm describing beautiful countryside and things, which I think is probably a sort of desperate attempt to get out of my house and but it's just, it came out. and then I could just see it again. It was like the way I was writing Empires of Dust, where I didn't know I had this woman who, a version of her had been in a short story I'd written several years before, but she was sort of formed in my head. What's chapter 2 of Order and the Sword was what it began with her in this beautiful English landscape, and then her life was sort of unfolding, and then I could see the whole thing and her arc. But she is me exploring a lot of the tensions I was feeling at the time and the pressures of the time, and also the tensions I feel about the world I created in Empires of Dust. So she's talking about the toxic masculinity that's in Empires of Dust, and she's incredibly attracted to it, but also fears it. So I was sort of, when I sort of talk about how Empires of Dust is the world, it is my psyche, it is the world I would want to live in some way. But I wrote every scene in that. It's a kind of, it is fantasy. It is, me projecting everything that I kind of dream about. It's, why do we? No one reads. We all read. If you read fantasy and love fantasy, or you watch fantasy films, or you play sort of immersive fantasy computer games, it is that fantasy of being there. The fantasy of fighting a dragon, or kind of, seeing those huge armies clash, leading huge armies, riding out, sort of leading the charge of horses, and all of that. That's why we read the books and play the games and watch the films. It's because we kind of fantasize about being there and being part of that, and it is amazing. And that kind of, seeing those amazing things and seeing those huge battles. But then, of course, as we were saying earlier, thank God we live these very dull suburban lives.
Yeah, I just think how terrifying it would have been.
Yes,
just to be, especially in the front line or sort of second lines, being forced into these things, and just literally, you can't fathom how scary it must have been.
Yeah, it must have been unbelievable, and yet it is something that we all fantasize about, and yet also interesting. The aristocracy, the nobles, are doing this. The experience of being one of the kind of co-opted peasants, or slightly later when you do have these kind of recruited armies, you are presumably part of the reason. By the time the 30 Years' War has been going for quite a while, or by the time the Roman Civil War has been going for a while, one of the reasons you can form get up another army very easily is because it's one of the few ways you can actually feed your family.
Yeah.
By this point, so it's that you are desperate. Someone is offering you a uniform, some kind of pathetic food ration, and a small amount of money, and the potential for more if you win. That you're reduced to that, as rather like today being reduced to cleaning toilets or something. It's not, you're not doing it out of love, but you're doing it because it's better than. It means you can feed your children.
Yeah.
But the nobles seem to be enjoying this. People talk about. Remember R.J. Barker talking about it must have been, being part of a medieval cavalry charge must have been absolutely terrifying. Well, actually, it probably wasn't, because, the big nobles are doing this again and again and again. The kind of, if you go back to Alexander and his nobles,
his companions,
they're doing this stuff. They keep doing this. Their whole lives revolve around owning big war horses.
And he wasn't shy of a cavalry charge, was Alexander?
No, he was not shy of a cavalry charge.
Yeah.
It was something that people, this is medieval society is based around war. Archaic Greek society, and then Alexander Macedonian society is based around war. It's not. It must have been terrifying and awful for some of the people involved, but if all it is awful,
I guess
society, the men, the very powerful men in society who keep doing it would, you'd assume, at some point stop doing it. It's kind of, yes, it self-replicates, but it's also clearly the very high nobility are getting a hell of a lot out of it because they keep doing it for generations. So, and they keep doing it repeatedly and almost every opportunity. And it's, when people talk about this sort of, proving you're a man and proving your masculinity and your prowess and praising someone, the most praiseworthy thing a man can do is be great in war. I mean, either we say they're all lying and they're all actually secretly terrified, or they are genuinely all enjoying. They are genuinely. These are societies where people are genuinely enjoying this stuff. The Iliad, things like the Iliad, are not poems about war being bad. The things like the the Godothin, which is a poem I draw on a lot, or kind of the Norse sagas. These are not stories and poems about war being bad. They are talking about how dying in war is
glorious.
But it's not as simple as this is not. In fact, this is just terrifying, and this is a bad thing to be involved in. There is
I think there's a different mentality back now. We appreciate it, we see it for what it is, and we've seen, we can physically see it. Oh, everybody.
Yeah, we're all fine.
I was like, oh no, we're calling again. But we've got a different mentality because we've seen, we can read about it quite extensively. We can see footage of these horrible things. We've got, tales about it. Back in the day, I think it could be romanticized and justified in a certain way, whereas now you can't really. You can romanticize it, but then there's all of this footage. There's physical photographs and things to show people how horrible war is. Well, back in the day, they could say, well, one, because religion is a big thing. So, well, if you die, you're going to go to heaven, or you're going to go to.
Because you'd have seen battlefields. I mean, yes, people sort of talk about, the American Civil War is the first war that civilians who aren't on the front line are seeing very clear photographs of what's going on and having journalistic accounts of what's going on very, very immediately. But I mean, you'd have seen battlefields. You'd have seen there's a wonderful, wonderful line in Mary Renault, the Mary Renault's book, Far From Heaven, which is the first of her Alexander trilogy, which is about Alexander's childhood, and it runs up to the point where it runs up to him before his father's death and him becoming king. And there's a wonderful bit where Philip has just swept down and sort of conquered the whole of Greece. And there's a bit where people people are standing on the roadside watching a chain of women and children being dragged off back to slavery to be sold as slaves. And she has this wonderful caustic line where people are sort of saying, look, so that's what happens, that's the pity of war. The lesson is win. And it's that kind of, the lesson of pity, the pity of war isn't don't fight. The lesson of the pity of war is, for the love of God, make sure that we're on the winning side, and ideally that the battle takes place several hundred miles away. And it's kind of, and yeah, so it's just, I don't know.
I have no doubt.
Again, it's that kind of I don't know.
I have no doubt.
I don't know what would happen if it came here.
I've no doubt there's fear, but I guess it depends on there's a lot of things. I don't know. You get I don't think you could say anybody isn't scared when they go to the battle unless there's some sort of they've got something slightly tapped in their head that sort of, and there are people like that who sort of, do like that sort of thing. And I'm sure they're the noble class. There are people, because obviously a lot of them, their genetics weren't exactly, tip top. But, I'm sure there's a lot of. Sorry.
I think there's also like the God-given right to rule. Like they feel we are kind of descendants of the king, therefore we have the right to rule because I have the king's blood flowing in my veins. Therefore, I am like a lord and master of all that surveys. And that kind of sheer, single-minded, blinkered hypocrisy.
Yeah. So that was very much. So it's exploring some of that from the point of view of of soldiers who are frontline soldiers who are but this is their job. They've been this is their life, is being kind of one in the rank soldier. So yes, that sort of terror and the knowledge that at any moment they could die, the knowledge, the uncertainty. What are they fighting for? They don't really know why they're doing what they're doing. They know that they're marching because their kings told them to march, and they know their kings told them that once they've won, that they need to win this battle. But they're not privy to actually what's going on, or the maneuvers, or the kind of politicking and the tactics and the strategy and the big grand plan. It's that their lives totally depend on stuff that they don't know and will never know, and have to be okay with not knowing. And they are frightened. They know they live with death constantly, and they have to deal with that. But they also, this is something they do. This is something that they are good at doing, and get satisfaction from the fact that they are good at doing, and are heavily invested in being good at, because it's a big core part of their identity. So so a lot of that, and then thinking about a woman in that situation became even more interesting, because to write about a woman in a environment which is predominantly male just became more and more interesting. So it's trying to explore all of that, about those kind of issues, about kind of, and it is very easy in Empires of Dust, it's very easy for Mareth to talk about, charging into battle and how much he enjoys battle, and sort of, because he has this absolute sense that what he's doing is in some way his destiny. He has this absolute sense of himself. He believe it's never clear. It's totally unclear to me whether he is genuinely this kind of incredibly super powerful and vulnerable figure, or whether that's just something he believes about himself, or even if it's a myth that he doesn't believe but is projecting about himself. But he has this sense, whether it's true or not, in the way Alexander clearly did, that there's something, that he's projecting something. It is a game for him, but it's not a game for the people in A Woman with a Sword, in a way. In fact, far beyond the way it's so in Empires of Dust, it's not a game for Tobias, because he's the only non-special person. He's just a very ordinary bloke. He's a middle-aged mercenary, and he's not a king. He has no magical powers. He has no huge insights. But at the same time, he's been there from the beginning. He's seen this stuff unfold. He's close to these big, huge characters. He knows Mareth quite intimately. He's bound up in the kind of the specialness of it. He's you kind of know spoilers. You kind of know he's not going to die, because he's kind of made special by the fact he's one of the big central characters. The people in The Woman with the Sword they are the pawns. They are just, there's no explanation for why stuff's happening to them. I don't give you any context and explanation. So actually, I didn't need to build the world in the same way I needed to build the world in Empires of Dust, because the kind of machinations and the politics. I mean, there are points where I'm not quite clear why they're marching off for 2 weeks in one direction and then turn around and march back in the other. I know little hints of what's going on, but I didn't kind of build and obviously I know what they are, but I don't know the details of it. It's all just kind of, I'm in their heads with this kind of, that sort of sense of chaos, that this is a world they don't understand, they can't control. And then sort of, they will be addressed by a powerful figure, a king or a queen or a great general. And that sense of thrill, that sense of power, that sense, again, why one of the reasons that we watch and read and play these play fantasy, is to have that sense of, the king striding up on his war cloak with his sword, and on his rearing white horse, and he makes a great speech. And you do feel something. That's kind of, partly you have that fantasy projection that you could be that, but also you just feel that thrill of watching it. It's kind of, and how so I'm writing about them feeling that, seeing that figure, basically in the same way I see that figure when I'm watching one of the endless numbers of fantasy films I watch.
Yeah, well, I've got loads of questions, but we obviously, because we do D&D and stuff like that, and some of the big moments that everybody loves the most is that pre-battle speech writing point where they can say something, they could be epic, they can sort of talk, they can inspire, they can sort of kind of just, and you really feel it it really gets you going. You can like, if with a good speech, my brother's quite good at them, you sort of, you can really get into it. Mr. Allison over here did a great speech before his character was unceremoniously killed in the last. But
I'm what I wanted.
So he had a great death speech and stuff, but it was just really those moments where you're just like, yeah, you can see how they can rouse people and they can sort of, really inspire people to do things and stuff, because it's just like, I'm not sure if it's just inbuilt in human nature to want to be led or want to be sort of kind of inspired or something. I don't know what it is, but
well, I'll also add that speech writing is a very specific skill. Politicians hire speech writers to write inspiring speeches. That is like a genuine career choice. I want to be a speechwriter, and because a good speech will rouse a country. A bad speech is political suicide.
Yeah, and you can tell the difference between one that is from the heart and one that's just being read off in a sort of kind of, monotone sort of way and stuff, if there's some sort of a kind of emotional attachment to it. The other question I wanted to ask you, what sort of era is your sort of canon set in? Is it sort of early medieval? Is it sort of pike and shot? What sort of kind of era have you sort of kind of gone with?
It's a kind of horrible hodgepodge. So we have
that's kind.
Yes, we have we have bronze and iron technology.
Yeah.
Basically, because it's the world of Empires of Dust and A Woman of the Sword is a kind of hodgepodge of all the things I like the most. So there's lots of stuff about art bronze, because it's riffing on the Iliad, and even bronze armor is it's hugely important, and all the stuff about the killing bronze in the Iliad is so important. So there's lots of stuff about bronze, but then we also do have iron. So it's probably, I sometimes think of it as it's sort of
late antiquity.
Well, I think it's or kind of it's that sort of Dark Age Britain kind of it's that kind of it's partly kind of Bronze Age Greece. And it's partly kind of that sort of late antiquity. The Romans have just left Britain, not Saxon, but that kind of the sort of what I still call the Dark Age, which I got told off terribly for calling it. It's such an incredibly romantic. It is this intense, just such a romantic.
Yeah.
Sense.
Who told you off?
Oh, just an academic saying no one should use
right.
it because it's terribly, and it suggests they're all illiterate, but they mostly were illiterate, and I don't see what's wrong with them being illiterate anyway. But we know very little about. We don't know very little about that period. It is a sort of,
and that's why it's called the Dark Age, is because
that's why it was called the Dark Age. Yes.
That's why it's called the Dark Age, because we don't know as much about it. You know a lot about sort of Roman era because it's all right, but that period of time with the shrinking of the Roman Empire and stuff, it just sort of, you don't get as much written sources as you would before and then after it.
Yeah, it's sort of, when people say, which suggests they're all really ignorant and they're all really stupid. Like, well, no, it doesn't. It suggests it's a period where you don't know much about things, and actually, the fact that you don't know much about things means you can take all kinds of really exciting speculation about how society might have operated, and sort of you can actually play around with possibilities, and it didn't talk about futures where it didn't have to go the way it did, and that sort of things. I think the term that the Dark Age is in a world that you can't pin down and say, oh, we know everything about it. You can only ever imagine it and dream it. I think I like it. I find it a terribly romantic term because of that. But anyway. But no, so it's that kind of period. It's not, we know it's a very low level of technology. It's kind of iron and it's iron and bronze and kind of very basic technology. So no, it's not sort of, but then a lot of the stuff, as I said, about the way people are living as camp followers and as kind of as this huge army, this sort of huge army that's just sort of moving around with all its camp followers. A lot of the stuff about that is drawn from from stuff about the 30 Years' War, and from, because Mother Courage obsesses me and it's something that I want to write about, and the kind of there's the really strong elements of mother courage in A Woman with a Sword, and also because I suspect life probably was pretty similar. The experience, I imagine a camp follower in Alexander's army and a camp follower in the 30 Years' War, it probably is a fairly similar experience. It's not obviously they've got different levels of technology, but ultimately it probably was a fairly similar experience.
Yeah, even down to the weapons and stuff they would have used.
Some of the weapons, yes.
Yeah, it's basically they had the phalangides and for the phalangeteers, or the pikemen for Alexander's army and stuff, and then you had the pikemen for in the 30 Years' War and stuff. So they are very similar. They would have had, obviously maybe they would have steel cuirasses instead of bronze cuirasses, but very very similar. Very similar.
And both armies.
I also think about, so when I'm using magic and dragons and things, I actually also think about kind of those sort of that point in early modern and modern warfare where people suddenly have armaments and they have mass bombardments for the first time. I mean, you get really bizarre, there's extraordinary accounts in the Napoleonic Wars of people in their they're not even wearing an armor, and I know armor's not going to have any effect anyway, but they're not even wearing armor, they're just wearing a cloth coat. And they're lined up, and they're lined up standing in formation,
getting shot at
under cannon fire for hours.
dead and square.
The thing in Napoleonic warfare is this, just standing in formation while you're taking artillery fire. And I can never really understand why. I have no idea why they're doing it.
It's because of its efficiency with the fight. The whole formation is because the guns were so inaccurate that they had to sort of have them in mass rank so they could hit things. And it was just it's
if
mad.
you think about it rationally, you say to someone, I want you to just not wearing even any armor. And I know, again, a tin hat isn't going to protect you, but still, you in your hoodie, just go and stand there for 3 hours, absolutely rigid. You can't run away, you can't even duck, while some blokes chuck cannonballs at you. I mean, and so I read about stuff like that, and I try and imagine what it must have been like, the experience of actually. So, I mean, in the Malazan books, there's stuff about that where, the bridge burners are standing in formation, and they're just being pounded with mage fire and with various mageries, and they just stand there. And it's exactly the same. It's kind of just, it's insane, but they're doing it. So there are little bits in A Woman with a Sword where people talk about, where you stood in formation under dragon fire because you were told to do it, and you did not break the line. You could say afterwards, no matter, you did not break the line. I mean, there's again, coming back to the Second Danish-Prussian War, there's a television series that was made based on these accounts of people's experience of the battle, and it has this mesmerizing scene where the Germans use their howitzers for the first time. So you have the Danish army is sort of camped, and I think there's a town next to them, and then in the middle of the night, the Prussians unleash this vast bombardment of howitzers, which is like nothing. And the way it's told in the television series, certainly the Danish soldiers have no experience of this. This is not like anything they've ever seen before. And so they look up, and the sky is silver with shot, and it's exquisite. It's one of the most beautiful things you've ever seen. It's like the sky is full of silver fireworks. The whole sky is just lit up, and there's this silence and this incredible silver light. And then everything hit, all the mortars hit, and it's just absolute carnage. This vast, deafening roar and everything exploding. But for a moment, the soldiers are just staring, and it is incredibly beautiful. The sky is silver with light, and then it's just utter devastation. And again, that kind of trying to imagine what that, to see a dragon, or to see a mage fire, something that is just beautiful beyond any human comprehension. You couldn't, just to stop and stand and see a dragon coming towards you, and and you can't not but feel, your heart is just leaping with joy because it's the dragon.
Yeah.
And then it just consumes everything.
Yeah.
But you stood the line. You held the line because.
Yeah, I mean, your writing really captures that. I mean, it's like the very lyrical quality to your writing. It's like it's almost like reading poetry.
Oh my God.
And it's like I think it's like Leonard Cohen meets Joyce or something like that. And it's really beautiful. It's like literally, I feel like I'm reading like a poetry or.
Actually, I write it to Leonard. I do write listening to Leonard Cohen quite a lot, actually.
Okay, that explains everything.
I do love that. I love Leonard Cohen. I love Leonard Cohen.
But no, what you're saying about kind of capturing that beauty in the most in atrocity. Beauty and atrocity is like, yeah, absolutely. I can, because you really capture that kind of those moments of beauty, and then sudden absolute devastation and horror occurs.
It's that kind of. It's the kind of awe and the sublime. It is that kind of moment where, that kind of. And that moment again, that sort of being on the battlefield. I mean, I imagine it is. It must be a sublime experience to be in that kind of carnage, to be on that moment where you are killing, and you are any moment you are on the point of death. Where you are absolutely walking on the knife blade, where any moment you could be dead, and you are yourself killing. It does feel. I mean, I have a sense that must be a profoundly sublime experience. That must have been one of those moments when you do feel you are on the edge of touching God, because it must be an experience beyond most normal human comprehension. That sort of just that moment. I mean, there are very few moments in your life when you reach and you are in that kind of transcending any kind of normal human state, and I assume that is one of them. So I do. I think about it. I think about that kind of stuff quite a lot as well for some reason.
It's just always I always find it quite insane that you have a set of wars leading from effectively American Civil War all the way up to World War One, and the technology and the ability to kill others in more gruesome ways was increasing, and yet we had World War One where they were still using Napoleonic tactics for all intents and purposes, and yet they had so many wars that they could have learned from and didn't learn from, and they just sort of kind of just carried on as they were, and it's just mad. But it's just like, it took them the amount of casualties it took for them to realize it's like, okay, well, maybe this isn't the way to do things, despite there being trench warfare in the American Civil War, and there being machine guns effectively in the Franco-Prussian War, Menes, you had Gatling guns and things like that in the American Civil War as well and stuff. You had all these things, weapons that were getting more and more powerful, more and more destructive. Artillery, the Russo-Japanese War and stuff, all these things which pointed towards like, war's getting a lot more destructive, war's getting a lot more sort of, nasty. We need to you might want to learn from that. And they kind of went, nah, we're not going to do that.
I think it's difficult to conceive of. I think it's difficult to really conceive of changing tactics. You're in that kind of, there's always that arms race between, developing something that can kill more powerfully and developing something to protect you. So, sharper swords, bigger armor, sharper swords again, that kind of. But I think it just, you reach that point where it's difficult to kind of really conceptualize war changing. It's difficult to kind of.
Yeah, I get that. Actually, I understand that, and it's only because and this is a really bad example, but this is me sort of kind of trying to understand it. But I play a lot of war games with my brother, and you'll spend ages sort of kind of building your army based on a specific set of units and tactics and things like that, and then somebody will come along with something completely different, and instead of kind of going, well, I need to start to deal with that. It's like, well, no, I've got this thing that I'm good with. I'm used to. I understand how to do it, and you don't want to change because it's change, and you feel like you're good with this thing, and then you get wiped out, and all it takes is it takes a couple of losses before you realize, like, shit, maybe I do need to change the way how things happen and stuff.
And again, change is scary for very much the military mindset, where it's kind of a very structured way of thinking about things.
People do tend to double down on mistakes.
Yeah.
It's the kind of classic tragedy of looking at disasters is often that people you do something and it produces a bad outcome, but your solution is to think, well, I obviously didn't do it hard enough or well enough, so I shall do it again, harder. And of course, what you're actually doing is then ramping up the negative effects. But then you're like, oh shit, it's still not working. So I need to do it for the third time really hard. And you're actually, rather than, and it is that kind of it's that sort of assumption that it must, everyone's always told you it works. So if it's not working because you're not doing it, you're not applying it well enough or hard enough. I mean, that's actually Liz Truss is still making that argument, isn't she? She's still saying that, she's still just going that the problem was she didn't do it. If she'd only gone in even harder,
God,
we'd all be better off now. It's that, because the only way she can articulate to herself it didn't work was that she didn't do it enough. And if she'd just done it,
it's pride.
Better.
That's pride. I think pride's a massive thing, I think, and this is one thing that I sort of always think about. It's like, so people are so afraid of being told they're wrong. It doesn't matter in your own life. Somebody tells you you're wrong about something, you always get slightly offended, and it takes you a while when you realize, okay, maybe I was wrong, and then it takes you a while to sort of kind of realize, and then you sort of kind of do it, you get over it. But being told you're wrong, being told that something is wrong, is a big sort of, oh, it's not. If I don't want to be wrong, and therefore you'll do things, you'll carry on and you'll double down on mistakes, people on arguments and everything, because it's better to be wrong and sort of right in your own brain than to actually do the right thing and accept fault.
And also, to be fair, and also from politically speaking, being seen to be wrong.
Exactly, and that's it. So it's better to sort of take the country.
Admitting to be wrong. Admitting to be wrong would be essentially political suicide at this current state of mind, which is really bad, because things change. One strategy, one tactic, one solution is not a constant. You have to come up with a new solution to meet an ever-changing problem.
Well, see, that's where you get sort of, and I've always found this. It's like, I understand, you get politicians and they'll do one thing and then they'll change their mind, and then the other party automatically turns around, oh, you're flip-flopping, look what you're doing. It's like, yeah, well, would you rather that they did carried on doing the thing that they did? And see, that's where it reinforces the idea that they shouldn't change their mind, because if they do, the other side's just going to go, whoa, you're idiots, you're flip-flopping and stuff. And it's just like, right, I understand if you're making loads of mistakes and you're having to keep on going back on them, that's a bad thing. But if you make a mistake and you change your mind and go, look, fine, you were right. There shouldn't, this whole like, oh, way, you've done something wrong and we're gonna carry on. It just reinforces the wrong sort of behaviors in my brain. And it's the same with everything. People are so worried about being wrong or being mocked and sort of thing for being wrong that they will literally just go down a route, because it's better to be sort of solid with what you believe than actually right. Ideological basically. Yeah, and it's just and it's all because you're fear. Like I try personally, I like most people, I don't like being wrong, but I try to accept it. If somebody tells me I'm wrong and they can prove there's a good evidence that I am wrong, I'll, instead of just kind of trying to fight it, I'll go, right, you know what? You're right, I'm wrong. And it hurts, and it's annoying, and you feel scundered, but it's better to accept it and try and make things better than to carry on down that route and just really be embarrassed later on down the line when history tells you that you're a fucking moron for carrying on.
And to be honest, Trish is a fucking moron. and that is how she's going to be seen in history. And if anyone complains about that...
Yeah.
Sorry. Anyway, back onto more pleasant matters. The horrors of war. Much more pleasant. But yeah, I mean, where where do you go from here? With Woman of Sword is out now. Where do you go from here? I mean,
would you do a historic thing? Would you do something? Would you do a historic one like Ramage or Sharp or like Hornblower or something?
Thought about it. I have thought about it. There's a lot of there's a huge amount of work involved. More because you can't just go off in a kind of, it's a hodgepodge. I decided to stick some stuff about bronze in because even though they're using iron, for some reason they're also using bronze, even though that would be really stupid because I just wanted to talk about them using, you can't.
Fantasy, you can get away with it. History, people kind of go, you'll think you'll find that in this area and stuff. History nerds will be all over you, whereas in fantasy, you can kind of get away with it.
Yes. And in fantasy, I get really kind of, when people talk about things like it's something being inauthentic in fantasy, it's just, I had this, that whole thing about, well, they wouldn't be drinking tea or they wouldn't be eating potatoes, and you're like,
there wouldn't be dragons flying.
They wouldn't be fighting the dragon either. So, come on. And there are, and actually, the tea thing and things is that kind of, it's so rooted in writing about war. The kind of, going back to the First World War, kind of, First World War soldiers in the trenches with their roll up and their cup of tea. In Britain, anyway, it's so absolutely central to the way we talk about war, and particularly kind of common soldiers in war. You can see them in the rain, in their trench. There's Blackadder, they're in the rain in the trench with their roll up and their little tin mug of tea. And the roll up and the tin mug of tea are the only two things they've got that are keeping them sane. And it's the only comfort they've got. And that's such a huge part of writing about war, that you have to have lots and lots of soldiers drinking tea, because it's not about, yes, you're writing a medieval world, but you're also writing about a culture, sort of, if a British writer, you're writing about British narratives about war, and tea is so totally embedded in that. And obviously, and you can't do that kind of thing in fantasy. You can't have that kind of, so it would be I've thought about it because I do love history and I love historical novels. But actually, where I'm going from here now at the moment is I have another new book out in September.
Oh,
wow.
Books out this year. Yeah.
Wow.
Which has been amazing. So that was written, so that's called A Sword of Bronze and Ashes. And that is, the book tags it as a dark folk horror fantasy from the Queen of Grimdark. So that's, it's a second world fantasy, but it's folk horror fantasy in a kind of epic fantasy second world. So it's actually, that came out of me rereading stuff like The Weird Stone of Brisingamen and The Dark is Rising during lockdown.
Oh yeah,
because those are some of my comfort books, and those classic stories of children with adult caregivers or protectors. And basically they have to go from A to B. And in fact, it's usually a landscape that they know well. They're traveling through, usually a place that they live or are staying. But it's made totally strange by the magic coming out of it. So, the Weird Stone of Brisingamen, they're on Audley Edge, and they know Audley Edge well. But suddenly it's completely changed. Suddenly all its secrets are revealed, and the kind of folk magic that's there under the surface appears to them. So it's taking that narrative trope, but writing it from the point of view of the adult caregiver, and it's about a mother trying to keep her children safe, and also what does she tell, what does she conceal, and the kind of knowing, that sort of sense of her children can fight the dark. It's much more good against evil than the stuff I've written previously. It is a kind of, again, it came out of lockdown, it came out of Black Lives Matter, it came out of Me Too, it came out of that point where you were like, actually kind of, there is evil in the world and there is some good in the world, and it is, there are things that is definitely worth fighting for, and it is worth dying for, and it is worth, but that point when you're kind of, that came from thinking about watching my children grow up a bit now, and again watching them grow up in lockdown and after lockdown, and that kind of, what do I want for my daughter? I wanted to be the chosen one. I wanted to be, good fighting against evil. I want, that kind of, what do we all want for our children? We want them to be an amazing force for good in the world. I also want to keep her totally safe. I want to keep her totally safe and naive. I want to keep her complicit. I don't want her to know the world is. I want her to fight the monsters and save the world from the monsters, but I also want to keep her so safe she doesn't even know the monsters exist. It's that kind of, and it would be safer for her if she was complicit and on the side of the monsters, because her life would be so much easier. And it's that kind of dealing with that negotiation from the point of view of the adult caregiver. It was also kind of hugely inspired by, I've been watching the Lord of the Rings films a lot, and there's that scene in the film of the Two Towers, of the Fellowship, when they're at Rivendell and they're all arguing over the ring, and you have that wonderful scene where you can see them reflect in the ring, and there's flames, and the dwarves and elves and humans are all arguing, and the world is going to be consumed in flames. And then Frodo stands up and says, "I will take the ring, though I do not know the way." And you have Gandalf's face, and he's just devastated because he knows that letting Frodo take the ring will mean that Frodo is destroyed, and it is something that Frodo cannot come back from, and he knows how much pain Frodo will endure, and he will probably die. But also, of course, he knows that that's the only way it can be done. The world can only be saved by sacrificing Frodo, and Frodo is in fact the only one who can do it. You can't trust it to. You can't give it to any of the others because Frodo's the only one who can achieve it. And that look of absolute pain in McKellen's face.
He does it so well, so good.
It's so amazing.
Yeah.
And I think, as as parents, we've all the horror of being in that position, the absolute fear of your child saying, I will, is a truly wonderful thing and is a truly noble thing. And of course, that's what you want your child. You want your child to be the one who will do the great noble thing and be there and good and save the world, but you don't.
Yeah.
And that, it really came from that kind of, again, those feelings, but it's a much more positive story. It's a much more kind of, it is a kind of good against evil. There is clearly good, there is clearly evil. And
you make a sort of an interesting point, because I've grown up my entire life reading Lord of the Rings, reading the Sharp series of history books. I like reading history, always being very sort of all about the good versus the evil, and sort of loving that whole fantasy drive of being the hero and sort of being the good guy, and good always prevailing over evil. But I think in a certain way it does keep you sort of isolated. It kind of bubbles you from the reality of what real life is, and that's why I've taken to one sort of like, I like to read history from the other side of the coin. So if I believe something or I've been taught something, I generally read the other thing just to make sure I've got a balanced view on it. But when it comes to sort of like books now, like sort of like Game of Thrones and Joe Abercrombie, First Law series and stuff, which is so good at this, where it literally, you do have good versus evil, but good doesn't always come out on top, and it's sort of that sort of reality that kicks in, and it's just like you're not expecting it, and it's sort of like, it's just like, I want this guy to be awesome. I'm assuming you've read the First Law, the First Law books, the trilogy, or his other books by Joe Abercrombie.
It's 4 of 6. I always say a lot of those. I sort of say grimdark is basically the point when fantasy finally has to face up to real life.
Yeah, I understand that, but it's like it's got, you can have moments where it's like, you have those heroic moments, but it sort of it grounds you in that it's like, shit does happen, and bad things do happen to good people, and the bad guy does sometimes come out on top, and that sort of thing. It's real life, but it's like a good mix between sort of, you have your books that gives you the hero and gives you that sort of drive to be high fantasy, to be the good person and to be the hero and stuff, but then you're sort of measured out by these other fantasy books that sort of kind of go, you know what, well, there is heroes, but they don't always end out on top, and it's good to sort of keep, instead of just sort of kind of having one set, having these both sort of there just to show you, they give you a bit of a balance in your life, because if you grow up thinking that everything's going to be good, and as we know, it's not like that, you know, it can be a bit of a shock. And
see, I've never seen Sharp as remotely the hero. I find Sharp absolutely terrifying. He's always there's the stuff in Woman of the and in the special edition, this special edition,
yeah,
which is this is a limited edition signed by me, and it's got a special essay in it which is available nowhere else, where I get quite nasty about people like Sharp. I get really stressed at Sharp because that whole, you know, I find him absolutely terrifying. He's going on and on about his honour. What
is it about Sharp that sort of is his sort of matches, his sort of
like, that, you know, he is a warrior. He goes on and on about his honour, and that sense of kind of like, well, you know, fuck your honour. You know, what do you think? You know, again, you know, women in war, you know, they don't talk about their honour. They talk about doing absolutely anything they can to keep their children alive. It's that, you know, he goes, Sharp really scares me, the way he talks about his honour all the time. He talks about, you know, he would rather die than compromise his honour.
That's that was a very Napoleonic,
yes,
like
kind of really, but then I mean,
Victorian sort of.
You know, I did a thing a couple of years ago where the Starks. I don't think the Starks are good. The Starks are. No, Ned Stark is absolutely terrifying. All he needs to do is not tell his best friend a really bad thing that will destroy his best friend, and if he just doesn't do that, then nothing that then unfolds will unfold. I know, but you got it. But he's so like, my honour, I must. And in fact, it begins with that scene with him. Right at the beginning, he's executing someone.
Yes.
And he's doing it himself. And you know, his honour is that he must show justice by killing someone himself to show, you know, the Lannisters. They just, you know, they get someone to do it for them. They have an executioner, but he kills criminals himself because he has his honour. He's a fascist. Ned Stark is terrifying.
What about rehabilitation?
Why?
It's just that, but it's that kind of, and then, I mean, again, that kind of, you know. So there's Robb Stark with his whole, you know, his honour now says that he must marry this woman. You know, found himself in a moment of weakness having sex with this pretty young woman, and now he must marry her. And because he marries her, he will have to undo this whole incredibly complicated allegiance that his mother has negotiated, and you know, and then loads and loads and loads of people die, and loads of other people see their farmlands destroyed and their cattle destroyed and their crops stolen and their whole livelihood destroyed.
I know, but
he doesn't just say, look, you know, sorry, I'm really sorry. I took your virginity, and you might, and you know, at this point, I'm not sure whether you might be pregnant or not, but you know, just fuck off.
I know, but I don't think that's. I understand where you're coming from. I don't think I agree with you.
Like, oh, my honour.
I do. Trust me, I do.
I don't know if I agree with you, simply because like, this is an example. Me and my brother have been playing a game called Stellaris, and it's like a sci-fi sort of kind of galactic conquest game. And they have these like space wheels that have sort of kind of been in my area for hundreds. The game spans hundreds of years, and I refuse to kill them despite the galactic council basically sanctioning me, and I was losing all kinds of resources, and I couldn't do it because I had basically made peace with these things, and I wasn't, even it was because it was detrimental to me, it was detrimental to my allies, I couldn't do it because it's an honorable thing, because it's like I couldn't do it. Now I eventually, after like 300 years of the game or whatever, had to, because it was completely down out. But I grasped.
So you put your civilization for 300 years of death, torment, and hardship.
All right. So, but let me get this right. So, if I was to give it's still a principle. I don't think honor is a bad principle. I understand that it causes a downfall of a lot of people, and you can see that in the Game of Thrones. Not so much in Sharp, but you know, you can see, like, you know, honor, you know, even throughout history and stuff, people doing honorable things doesn't always end up sort of the right thing, and that's why Joe Abercrombie's books does that quite well. It's like there's like Dan Luther is an honorable guy, but he ends up getting absolutely shafted, and it's like, you know, but I don't think it's a bad thing. It's maybe not a smart. It's not a smart thing. It's not a, especially it's not a. Well, no, I don't think it's an excuse. I don't, because if you were to, for example, Pete, and I'm seeing if I can try. If you were to be given a ward, you know, you were given responsibility for somebody. You grew the.
I've got 3.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, you're given responsibility. So somebody turns up to you. And you've been given responsibility. Say you foster somebody or something, you're given responsibility for that person, and somebody turns around to you and says, right, well, for the greater good of this community, you need to get rid of that person because they're not from this area, not this, blah, blah. You have to understand that this could cause X, Y, and Z. You're not just going to give them up. You're not going to just give them up. It's not as easy as like, I understand the grander scheme of things. I understand that, you know, if I don't do this, then this X, Y, and Z. But as a human being, as a person who has feelings and has sort of, you know, I wouldn't want somebody doing that to me. I want somebody to have my back. You couldn't just do that sort of thing. So I understand Ned Stark. The Sharp thing is just Napoleonic romanticism, isn't it? Really,
and Ned's Sharp, but then you've got to live forever with the knowledge that because there is in fact there's no good outcome. I mean, you have to live forever with the knowledge that by saving that one child that you love, you have doomed an awful lot of people. It's not actually that simple. It's, I mean, people always say about the Le Guin story, the ones who walked away from, and I can never remember the name of the city. The Le Guin short story where people discover they live in this wonderful paradise city. It's a really wonderful utopian city, and then they discover that at the heart of the city is a child being tortured, and the city is only the utopia it is because of the continual agony of a child. So the question is, do you walk away or do you stay? And people always say, well, obviously you walk away. But then, of course, you walk away and you're taking your own family, so your own children.
I know, but it's principle, surely. So you're
taking them out to somewhere where they are then suffering. You're taking them away from a wonderful environment where they can grow up in a very utopian peace, in complete safety. And you're taking them away to experience hunger and fear and danger out in the wild.
Yeah, but would you want that on the back of suffering though? It's like this is a really extreme example, and everybody goes this way when you're sort of like you're living in Nazi Germany, and you don't know any different because whatever, and you've got a job and you've got this, that, and the other, and it's like, yeah, all this bad shit's happening because of that, but your family's safe and your family's safe. It's like, surely there's principles behind these things. You can't just go, well, it's for the greater good of everybody else that this person suffers, or do you got to go, do you know what? Do I have to accept that I can't let another person suffer as well? And sort of just, fine means the detriment to my family.
List. It's
yeah, so
Schindler's List, man. People did stand up for their principles and said no. And
exactly. But that thing is, in the greater, what I'm understanding, what you guys are saying is, they could have just sat there and not. Schindler could have just turned around and said, "Well, I can have an easier life for me and my family."
I think the only human answer to say is to say I don't know. I genuinely don't know. Yeah. I think that's the only kind of, and I mean, I should talk about Leonard Cohen. There are 2 different Leonard Cohen songs that really sum this up. Actually, there's an amazing Leonard Cohen song that he sings called "The Partisans," a song that he does, a wonderful song. It's a partisan song. It's about, I think it's about Jewish partisans in the Second World War, and it's it's a song about I've changed my name so often. I've lost my wife and children. There were 3 of us this morning. There's 1 of us this evening, but still I go on. And it is that it's that absolute. The only thing you can do is fight, and you must sacrifice everything because you are fighting against something that is totally evil. You must kill the monsters, and if it means loss of everything, if it means losing everyone that you love, if it means your own death, it is more important because you must kill the monsters. But then at the same time, that kind of, that sensible, isn't it better just to care up at home with the people you love, and
I know,
and
but then
all
if
he ever says, I don't know. Genuinely, I don't think I know. I don't think I could actually genuinely say in the end.
Thing is, the way I see it is, if you don't stand up for principle, and I understand that the principle is very sort of fluid depending on person to person. So the whole Ned Stark thing is, there is a bit more. He could have probably used a bit more tact in certain. There's certain things he could have maybe ignored for the greater good. And there's there's certain principles I think you should always adhere to, but when you're those sort of things, I can kind of understand. Different, that's very fluid, but I think if you don't stand up for principles and you don't stand up for honorable things, then you wouldn't have society becoming a better place, and it would just be, well, I'm okay and that's all that matters, and therefore nothing would get better, because you do need suffering to make something.
What about my children are okay, and that's all that matters?
Yeah, but that's it. But the thing is, if everybody had, I understand as a mother, you're going to be very, and I I'm not, I don't have any kids. I don't have any kids, so I don't, again, so it's hard for me to sort of kind of grasp that sort of kind of feeling because I don't have them, and I can understand maybe my parents would think, but in my mind, it's like, if everybody has the same view that as long as my kids are okay, it doesn't matter, then nothing changes, and surely there has to be a line. You're going, what? There has to be suffering, and it's somebody, and who's the braver person? The person who accepts that suffering and moves on and does something about it, or the person who just accepts the status quo and, the child in the middle of the city being tortured. It's, for me personally, and I have a really strong view on right and wrong. As much as I believe the world is very black and white, it's not very black and white, it's very grey. The world is a grey place. But, I have strong feelings about what is right and what is wrong and stuff. And I feel like I've done stupid stuff because on principle, just on principle, I've sent emails I shouldn't have sent because in my principle, I was like, I need to send that, and I've got in trouble. But it's like, as much as I didn't like getting in trouble, I felt like my principle made me say I had to say that thing because it was the right thing to do. So I'm not saying you're wrong or anything. I'm just like, my opinion is, if everybody has the same view that I'm okay, my family's okay, nothing else matters, then nothing gets done and nothing changes. We wouldn't be here if people hadn't revolted or hadn't sort of gone through heartache to sort of make things better, and that's just sort of kind of my view on it.
I think the Will Wheaton rule of just don't be a dick is probably the best one.
Well, that's true, but that's it. That's a good rule. But the problem is, there are dicks out there, and there's a lot of dicks, and that's the problem, and that's why you have to have. Because if we lived in a utopian society, or we lived in a society that was a lot more free and people were just a bit more cool to each other, then it wouldn't be a massive issue. But we don't. We live in a society where, and this is what I've had massive long debates with I've got some people who are really into this whole side of thing about communes and stuff like this, and everybody should have they can do whatever they want and they all get paid the same and all this other stuff. And it's like, yeah, that works if everybody's the same and has their own sort of thing going on, but all it takes is from one asshole to sort of not give a shit and not pull his weight and stuff, and then that brings everything down. Or him, the next commune on, they might go, hey, well, they've decided they're not going to have weapons and they're going to do this. We can take advantage of that. And there's always somebody who's going to take advantage of that situation. It's throughout history. Communism is a massive sort of show for this. It's like people just taking advantage of the situation, and therefore you have to have a point where principle matters. And there's, you have to stand up for it, because unfortunately we don't live in an equal society with people cares the same amount. People care about power, they care about money, and they care about the families, and sometimes all three of them. And unfortunately, that's...
And we come back to just basically, best thing to do is don't be a dick.
Yeah, that's the best thing, but it doesn't mean I know. But I understand that, but it's like it's okay saying that, but that's not going to happen.
But it's where that runs up together. It's where the kind of the responsibility and the desire to protect your family or those that you love most comes up against the fact that means you have to be a dick to others. That's where it's really interesting. That's where you can't answer it until you've been there.
Yeah, I'm not saying it would be easy.
That's one of the things all my books are about, is trying to explore that moment of how do you deal with that?
Protecting family against the rest of society.
Yeah, well, I'll give you an example of how I would go against, I would break law to do something. Like I was thinking about this the other day. Like I bring my dog back in the boat to Northern Ireland all the time, and every single time I get in that boat, my first thought is, because I love that fucking dog, and I was like, if it came to it, right, and they said you're not allowed to go down to the car deck to get at all when the boat's going, and I'm like, if this boat was sinking, they would literally have to drag me off that boat before I would try and get my dog. I would go down with the boat other than sort of try and get off it and stuff. I would, but the thing is that it could be detrimental to other people because I'm thinking about me and I'm thinking about my family, my dog, and it's just like, all I'm thinking about is he going to be safe? And I would break my heart if I was alive and he wasn't and stuff. And I'm, so I understand the feeling about sort of things you love and care, and that sort of like, all you want to do is keep them safe. But then sometimes, it's just like you have to weigh that up with principle and accepting the greater good in a way, I guess.
But I think we went a bit off topic here. But anyway.
I don't think we have. I think it's been really good. It's good to have that sort of to and fro.
Yeah, where can readers find your books, and where can readers meet you, Mike?
Oh goodness. Readers can find my books. They can find The Empires of Dust still in most good bookshops. Obviously, you can find stuff online. You can order. So, Woman of the Sword is with a smaller press. It's with a press called Luna Press, which is a wonderful Scottish publisher. You can find from Luna Press's own website, or it's available online from all the from Amazon, Waterstones, Blackwell's, and sort of not in the UK. I think it's available through Amazon, so my book should be. If you sort of go to the big book selling websites, I'd rather people didn't use Amazon, but.
But at Luna Press you can get the special edition.
At Luna Press, yes, Luna Press, and also the Broken Binding, if people are familiar with that, which is a wonderful ebook store which specialises in fantasy and science fiction and historical fiction. They do specials. There's a special you can. There's a waiting list to be on there. A member of their specials club where you get some special every week. They do special editions, they do signed editions, they wrap everything beautifully. You could, in fact, just, if you have friends and family who like fantasy, science fiction, or historical novels, you probably could get all your Christmas and birthday presents there without actually bothering to wrap it, because it all comes
nice.
It comes beautifully packaged. They sent me a load of signing sheets a while ago for something, and it was so nicely packaged. I thought someone had sent me a present. But they're a wonderful bookshop, and they also have the special edition. So the special edition is £30. It's signed and numbered, and I put little gold ink and stuff on the signing sheet, and it's got it's got the short story Red Glass, which is about Lydie in an earlier iteration. So it's about the main character in the book in an earlier iteration. And it's also got this exclusive essay, and you can get that or the normal book in hardback or softback from Luna Press or from a Broken Binding, and you can get the normal softback or hardback from Luna Press or from Amazon, Waterstones, etc. You can get Empires of Dust anywhere. Also, there's a big batch of signed copies of the Empires of Dust book at Broken Binding as well at the moment. And the new book will be out in September, and again should be available in all good bookshops and online from all major retailers. And where I will be at Chimera in Edinburgh. I'm doing a thing on the Friday night at Chimera, Friday the 2nd of June, I think it is, with Gareth Hanrahan and Ian Waits. And then I will be, where will I be after that? I'm with FantasyCon in Birmingham.
In Birmingham, yes, I should be there.
Oh, excellent. And BristolCon in October. And I'm hoping I was supposed to be at Super Relax FantasyCon last week, but I had COVID. So I'm hoping to be back at Super Relax FantasyCon. Yeah, it was amazing. It was supposed to be me, Juliet McKenna, and Michael Miller. Me and Juliet McKenna both got COVID from EasterCon. So Michael Miller had the stage to himself.
I think everyone got COVID after EasterCon.
Yeah.
It's just
one
of those unfortunate ground zero for for a mini outbreak, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it was just a very, very fast incubating and quite virulent strain of it. Yeah. But it's just one of those things. I mean, I was saying to people, it could have been a lot worse. It could have been a norovirus outbreak. I mean, occasionally, you get a group of people and it just happens that a very particular nasty virus or bacteria just happens to find it perfect. It's not, people are sort of saying, oh, EasterCon should have done more or something. What could they have done? They had 800 people in a hotel. There's nothing, and we do have, it could have been a flu, it could have been norovirus. Occasionally you get these catastrophic outbreaks. And, and up until quite recently, it was, it would have just been everyone just saying like, yeah, con crud. Some fucker brought a cold and we all came with home with colds. And that would have been all it was. I remember when I used to go to the Whitby Gothic weekend, Whitby flu was just, everyone was like, oh. But it was just, what do you expect? We've been partying hard, living off beer and chips for 3 days.
I was at Sci-Fi Weekend last month, and I'm amazed that I didn't come down with anything. I felt a bit rough afterwards because I'm dancing around and partying and drinking and eating bad food for 3 days. But I didn't come out about the hundreds of people there. I didn't come down with anything. I just felt rough because lack of sleep, lots of dancing, crap food.
But, and I'm hoping to come. So I just want to make a public statement saying I think it's totally unfair to anyone to blame EasterCon for anything. It was just, and also it was a hotel by an airport. There were also people who were at the NEC doing a gaming weekend staying there. It's
Insomnia.
So so there were people who, again, another lot of people in a slightly different confined area who were also getting no sleep. I presume they weren't drinking as much as they were computer gaming, but who were also living off chips and 3 hours sleep. I mean, plus there's the airport. I mean, ideal breeding conditions for viruses, unfortunately. So but I'm also hoping to be at the Humber science fiction group, which in Hull.
Oh, nice.
At some point in the autumn. So
so a very busy time for you.
Very busy time. Yeah. Well, I've got 2 books to promote this year. So and I've just booked my membership for Worldcon Glasgow next year. So
nice.
Very much looking forward.
That is tempting. I'm not done it yet, but they're very tempting for next year.
I think that'd be so good. I know quite a lot of the people who are involved in organising it, and
nice.
I just think it'd be so good the way they're talking about it and the plans they've got and the stuff they've already done. I think it's just going to be an amazing. I think it'd be a brilliant event.
Okay, well, I'll put that in for next year.
Right.
And you can find me, all of this stuff, you can find me on Twitter and Facebook. Twitter at Queen of Grimdark, and Facebook and Instagram, Anna Smith Spark. And I don't post that much, but I do tend to put information about new books and new short stories and when and events I'm going to be at and that sort of stuff.
Awesome sauce.
Brilliant.
And pictures of my cats also.
Even better.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure if you want to do it. It's been going on for about an hour and 45. It's completely up to you. We can just end it now, but we usually end our podcast with, I'm not sure, did we wouldn't have done this with you last time because everything messed up, but we end our podcast with it's like a 20 questions type thing. So you choose a nerdy franchise, and you think of a character, and then we have to guess who that character is, and we'll all do one. So it can be like Lord of the Rings, it can be Game of Thrones, it can be Marvel, it could be DC, it can be any of your sort of kind of, as long as we have a sort of inkling of what it is. So you need to think of a franchise, then you need to think of a character within that franchise, then we will try and guess who that person is. So have a think. Obviously nothing too obscure. Don't do Pete. Pete likes doing either super easy or super obscure as Pete's MO generally. I've got one, if I'll give you sort of an example, if you want to go for it. It's middling. I'll give you. It's a middling difficulty, I think. And the franchise is Lord of the Rings.
I'm definitely screwed.
Franchise is Lord of the Rings. You've got 60 seconds. You can ask me whatever questions. I'll give you the answers. You've got 60 seconds. After the 60 seconds, you'll have one more question, and then you've got to guess who it is. You can obviously guess who it is throughout the 60 seconds. But we'll start here. So, Lord of the Rings, 60 seconds, go.
Are they in the films?
They are in the films.
Are they male or female?
Male.
Are they on the side of good?
They are on the side of good.
Okay. Are they in all three films?
Yes.
Are you Boromir?
I am not Boromir, right. But that's good. I'm not Boromir. You have a character, okay. I love Boromir, but yeah.
Right. Are they a human?
They're not human.
Are they elf?
No, they're not elf.
Are they dwarf?
Nope.
Okay. Are they hobbit?
Nope.
Are they one of the wizard things?
one of the wizard things, Pete. One of the wizard things.
I don't do Lord of the Rings.
Okay, no, they're not one of the wizard things.
Are they one of the horses?
They're not one of the horses. It's not. It's not Shadowfax. No. So you got one more. You got one more question and then a guess. So you've named every other creature. You haven't named this single creature, who are really pivotal in Lord of the Rings. No, they're not an ent. You got one.
Are they an eagle?
They are. They are an eagle.
Eddie the Eagle.
Edward. The eagles whose name I cannot remember.
It is going to be the main eagle from Lord of the Rings, whose name is Gwahir.
Eddie the Eagle.
Yeah, Eddie the Eagle. Okay. Yeah, Gwahir. Yeah, the Lord of the Eagles.
That's not middling, dude.
That is middling. The Eagles are like pivotal. Like, there's so much argument about the Eagles. Come on. That is middling. It's not obscure because they're like there. They're in all the films, even if fleetingly. And
what do they do in the Two Towers? Where are they in the Two Towers?
Where are they?
Are they in the Two Towers? I'm trying to think. It's been so long since I've seen it.
No,
so they get Gandalf. They get Gandalf from Orthanc. Yeah, and let's see. In the second one, because I think there's like a flashback, isn't there, from where he's been when obviously they meet Gandalf the White.
That's him fighting the Balrog.
I know it's a Balrog, but it's just.
I'm pretty certain the eagle is not involved in that bit.
Yeah. Well, they're in the films. You said, "Are they in the films?" And I said, "Yes."
You said,
I said maybe, but even so, I don't think it would matter. The 2 or 3 of them. I'll have to check that now. See if they're in the second film. It's usually I'm gonna have to watch them again now. I haven't seen them in so long.
What a shame.
Yeah. Anyway, so we've got one.
I've got one. Okay, Star Wars.
Okay, Star Wars, 60 seconds, go. Original trilogy.
No.
Prequel trilogy.
No.
Sequel trilogy.
Yes.
Are they a part of the First Order?
Yes.
Are they Are they male?
Yes.
Male and part of First Order. Are they? Is it? It's not. It's not Snoke, is it?
Nope.
Okay, it's not Snoke. Are they? Oh, are they? Do they have force powers?
No.
Are they that ginger bloke that has an argument with Kylo Ren?
Hux. Is it Hux? Is it?
It is indeed Hux, yes.
Is it Hux?
the ginger bloke.
Sorry.
We talked about toxic masculinity and immediately thought, right, sequel trilogy.
I've seen that film once.
Hux.
And I just had a vague memory of someone with red hair.
Yeah.
General Hux.
Yeah, played
Have
by
a tantrum.
Having a tantrum, yes.
What's Gleason? Gleason, one of the it's the son. Yeah. Right, it's your turn, Diana. What's your franchise?
The franchise is She-Ra and the Princesses of Power.
Ooh, She-Ra. Wow. Okay, She-Ra. Right, She-Ra.
Okay, what was this for 30 years?
No, not that. The cartoons, the new cartoon, the no, cartoon. Okay.
The new cartoon.
Okay.
Have either of you two seen this?
I have not seen
Sorry, no.
I've not seen the new cartoon. The new cartoon. Yeah.
Okay, the franchise is Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. Right.
Okay.
No, what's that for 15 years, but never mind. We'll go for it.
Buffy. 60 seconds. Go. Are they a vampire?
No.
Okay. Are they part of the Scooby Gang?
No.
Are they in all 7 seasons?
No.
Okay. Are they male?
No.
Yeah. Are they female?
Yes.
And they are human.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Are they related to Buffy?
No.
Right. Are they friends with Buffy?
Yes.
Right.
It's not. It's not
So
Willow.
not-
It's not Willow, is it?
No,
Does
Willow's in the Scooby Gang.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Keep up, Matt.
Yeah. I'm going to tell you something after this, but yeah. Sorry. Carry on.
Okay. Right. They're not in all seasons of it.
No.
Okay. Okay. I'm trying to think it up. Are they supernatural?
No.
Okay.
Okay. Last one more question. I don't have
So-
anything because
So human, female. Were they in at the start, or
Yes.
were they in? Okay, at the start, not supernatural, not part of the Scooby Gang. Did they go to the school?
Yes.
Were they one of the students?
Yes.
Belgians. No, that's not the name. That's just me. My brain going blank at this point. Sorry, I'm going to have to. No, my mind's going blank, unfortunately.
Cordelia.
She was part of the Scooby Gang.
Not part of the Scooby Gang.
She was.
Do you know, she's not part of the Scooby Gang.
She is.
No, she's not.
I
is.
have never seen an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer in my life.
Get out.
Or right, it just seems to be a Joss Whedon thing. Cause I've never seen Serenity.
I haven't seen Serenity or Firefly.
Or Firefly, yeah, never seen it. Everybody's like,
Not
oh,
bad,
that's
actually.
yeah, I don't see that.
We're now on our second viewing of Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Oh wow, okay.
We reached the end of. My daughter reached the end of series 7, and I've seen the musical episode 4 times with her now, and then which is even more times than I've seen the Princess Prom episode of She-Ra and the Princess of Power. But we're now back watching on series 1 again of Buffy.
Andrew
That's fair.
McLean Finney says Cordelia, is the Angel Gang, not the Scooby Gang. Here you go, Pete.
Andy, shut up. I say that because Andy is a very good friend of mine from university. I do know Mr. Finney very well. He's just wrong in this matter. She is part of the Scooby Gang.
Well, there's a sticky out tongue emoji there that begs to differ, Pete.
I've got another emoji for you, Andy.
Okay. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. I feel like I could sit here and talk to you about history and stuff for a very, very long time, but I think we'd probably be here for a very long time.
We could obviously argue about Ned and Rob Stark.
Oh, we could.
Which
We
gives
could.
you a resolution.
Yeah, that we could.
But, if he just told her, look, I'm really sorry I shagged you, and as an upper class woman, clearly your life is over now, and you're just gonna have to go and join a nunnery. But look, I'm sorry, I've got to marry this other woman who I have no interest in. I'd much rather marry you, but I'm sorry. Then none of that would have happened, and those people would still be alive. And he might have been king, and it could all have been fun.
Woulda, coulda, shoulda,
Yes.
If he just kept it in his pants.
If he had just kept it in his pants, yes. But if after he'd taken it out of his pants, if he'd just been a bastard to her, then all those loads of people might not have died.
Yeah, I tell you what, man. I remember reading the book, and I was like, Rob Stark. I was like, oh, I freaking love Rob Stark. He's such a cool character. And it's just like I was reading the book and just going, amazing. And my dad and my sister had read it before me. And I just remember being on holiday, and this was before the series had come out. So like, I'm reading these, pre-series, and I'm sitting there on the sun lounger with the shade because I'm Irish and can't do sun, and I'm sitting there reading this book, and all I remember is my dad and my sister looking at me intently because I was at the point they knew where I was, and I sort of got to the red wedding, and I'm like one page, and I was like, oh, and then the next page, and then they could just see me, my emotions draining from me, and literally getting to the point where I just picked up the book and went, "Fuck this book! I'm not doing this anymore. I can't believe this. Can't do it." And then at the end, I remember at the end of the holiday, because I read 5 of them in like the space of like 2 weeks. I literally just hammered them every day, and when Jon Snow, because at the end of the last book, Jon Snow gets his throat cut, and that's pretty, bar Kevin Lannister being assassinated by Varys in the book. That's sort of kind of it. And I just remember Jon Snow being basically in my mind killed because I hadn't, the series and stuff, and literally just throwing the book in the bin temporarily, just going, I'm not dealing with this shit anymore. Killing everybody I love in these bloody books. I took it out eventually, but it was just, I couldn't believe it. It took me a month to finish the last chapter because I was so pissed off with the whole thing. I was like, I can't believe it. Anyway, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you. Thanks
it's been
for having me.
great fun, and thankfully no technical problems. So all good. We have a full podcast this time round.
Well, no, actually, I kicked the lead for my lamp, my table lamp, and at the point I kicked the lead for my table lamp, that was the point at which me and then Peter went black. There cannot possibly be any connection. But there was.
Blockchain.
But thank you very much for tonight. I've been Matt Geary. With me has been Peter Ray Allison.
Good night, everyone.
And Anna Smith Spark.
Night.
Night.